All right, so thank you again for joining. As I mentioned, I'm David from EduSourced, and I have with me John Lenz and Dustin Rand from the University of Vermont School of Engineering. They're going to be talking to you about their capstone program. So they each run a separate capstone, but yet they communicate and work together in some ways that I thought was interesting and that you all would like to hear about that. And they're going to talk to you about using EduSourced and just the general experience of operating a capstone that's rather large. They deal with quite a few projects. A couple of housekeeping items. So there is a questions function in GoToWebinar. That's the platform we're on right now. So as we go, if you have questions about the presentation, type them in there. Any questions you get are great. We're going to have a stopping point for discussion in the middle of the presentation and again at the end. So if you have questions, push them to us and we'll come to them in the middle and the end. One other item, so EduSourced is currently doing a survey for sort of a state of experiential, and this is inclusive of business schools and also engineering schools. Some of you may have already seen an email about that. If you could take a couple minutes to complete that survey, and I'll send the link again at the end of the webinar, that would be super helpful. So we already have a lot of responses, but we want to grow the pool as big as we can, and then we're going to be sharing those results and insights back to all of you as, you know, trying to play our small part and facilitating best practices and benchmarking and sharing across schools, just as we are with this webinar. So with that, as part of our ongoing client webinar series, I will turn it over to John and Dustin from University of Vermont.
Great, thank you. Thank you, David. This is Dustin Rand from UVM. And
John Lenz, also from UVM. Our offices are side by side, and we teach similar courses, but we'll get into that.
Absolutely. Oops. Let me make sure I'm, all right, my screen is not, oh, there we go. All right, sorry about that. So I just want to go over just a quick agenda here. So we're going to start off by talking just a little bit about University of Vermont, who we are. We'll give kind of a big picture idea of how we use EduSourced kind of as the backbone of our course. Then we'll jump into some of the details of how we source and select clients and projects. And then we'll talk a bit about managing project selection. We'll have an opportunity for some questions. And then we'll look into overseeing the number of projects we have at scale. And then we'll talk a little bit about just cross-department communication. So how do John and I work together at UVM? So just for a little bit of background, so UVM, founded in 1791. We're a public university and we're located in Burlington, Vermont. For size, we're about 11,500 undergraduates. So I teach what we call the Senior Experience in Engineering Design, or SEED, and that's comprised of mechanical, electrical, and biomedical engineering students. My class is about 130 students, and I run between 30 and 35 projects each year, and it's a 2-semester class. My background is about 20 years in industry. I spent some time working in robotics. Then I did power systems, power electronics for radars at Raytheon. And then I worked for a number of years at a wind turbine company doing a lot of the electrical design for wind turbines and associated parts. And then this is my 3rd year teaching the senior design class.
This is John. I've got similar industry experience, and I'm teaching a capstone course that we've been having for, I think, the last 15 years. These last 2 years have been full year. In the past, it's been 1 semester. Oh, yeah, so let's see, 35. So I've got 35 years of industry experience, and I've been teaching this 3 years, taking it over from our department chair, who I think taught it for the most of the prior years since I think we started it in 2004.
Great. So I wanted to give you just how EduSourced is perceived by different parts, different users of the program. So from the client's perspective, we use it for proposing new projects, facilitating client and team interactions via discussions, exchanging files or email. It gives the clients an opportunity to actually review students' work, so any of their deliverables. And we also use it as a way for the clients to evaluate their team. So how did they perform on their project? And we let them do that twice a year. From the student's perspective, they're introduced to EduSourced right at the beginning, and they basically bid and apply to projects via EduSourced. They're able to view and follow all the course milestones, submit assignments. They also receive all the feedback that the instructors give on the assignments through EduSource. They store and manage files up there sometimes. They also receive feedback from peer evaluations through EduSource. One of the nice things I also like about this is the students use their single sign-on, so the same net ID for UVM they can use to sign on to EduSource, so it's one less password for them to remember, which is nice. From the instructor's perspective, I use it to manage project submissions, so all the projects coming in come through EduSource. I also use it to facilitate assigning students to teams. I use it for communication to students or teams as well. I use the milestones to actually attach assignments. So I define the course deliverables via the milestone feature. I also receive the deliverable. So when students turn in their information, it comes in through EduSource milestone, and I provide feedback as well. I can administer all the surveys I like, primarily between students and clients. And a nice feature is that at the end of the year, I can archive all the projects and it remains there for future reference, which is actually very helpful for ABET accreditation if you need to go in and look at how students did on assignments or get the actual work, it's all there. And I can also assign mentors to projects for advising. So from those, EduSource is really a big part of how we run the course right now. And that's kind of the top level view. And we'll get into some of the details in a minute.
So I'll just chime in that we've been using EduSource now. We finished our second year using that. And Dustin and I pretty much have the same approach as far as using milestones and using this as file storage and access for both our community partners or clients and advisors to be able to see what students have on a easy to reach platform.
So, so for sourcing and selecting clients, I'll step through how we go about that at UVM. So the first question is, how do we find these clients? So there is some repeat clients that come in from previous years. There's a lot of word of mouth. Vermont's a very small state. It probably has less people in our state than many of the cities that you live in. I attend networking events in Burlington or around the state. I go to career fairs. I also talk to other faculty, so some of our projects come from faculties, also students in clubs. I also have a close relationship with our College of Engineering career coordinator. So she coordinates students going into interns and co-ops and full-time positions. And so she's aware of our program, and as she communicates with her clients for placing students, she also talks to them about possible seed and capstone projects. And we also have an engineering management professor who's working on a program for a master's in engineering management, and we're going to be working with him to also help get out the word for our program.
Yeah, we're very similar in civil and environmental engineering. A lot of our projects are repeats from the same communities. A lot of our clients and community partners are really communities or government agencies. So it's a similar combination. We mine wherever we can, and hope we've got a match of both project types and community partners that are matched with our student interests for each year.
How do clients submit projects? So all of our project submittals go through EduSource right now, and you can see a link on the site on my page there that I show, where you can have new clients submitting projects or existing users can manage their projects or submit new ones. But everything is going through EduSource now, and it actually makes my life a lot easier. It's all in one place, and it also is then available for students later on down the road. So I'm not chasing emails down and phone messages for collecting projects. So once they've submitted a project, often clients don't give enough detail. So I work with the clients on defining the problem. So I'll review their problem statement. I'll try to figure out, why they want this problem solved, what their goals are, their deliverables, and try to get that all written down in this overview form that's available for the students later on. They also select the disciplines they need, so electrical, mechanical, biomedical, and in John's case, civil and environmental. And then they also have the opportunity to discuss special skills needed, so maybe some software requirements or FEA analysis or things like that. And the last thing is we define the funding. So how much of the project, what's the billing going to be? So how much of the money is going to go for sponsoring the program, and how much of it is going to material cost? So from the seed program, we have two fees. One is a fee to sponsor the program, and the other is to pay for the materials. And depending upon the size of the company and the financial stability of the company determines where they fall in those two categories. At a minimum, we expect all clients to be ready to pay at least $1,000 for material costs to cover the cost of their for the project.
In civil and environmental, we don't really have that many expenses because we're usually working with some software. Students have some travel expenses if our sites are away from campus. Occasionally, some minor purchases. So we haven't been charging for our services, mostly because these municipalities don't have a lot of funds, and partly because there's not that much that we need to charge for. So we absorb those costs within our department budget.
Yeah, our material cost for some of our projects can be $4,000, and I've had some go up as high as $10,000 just for material costs. And the sponsorship levels range from nothing if it's a startup or nonprofit up to $5,000 or $6,000 to sponsor a project. Once we've kind of ironed out the details of the project, then I have a form that's a letter of understanding or an LOU. It defines the expectations between the client and UVM. It talks a little bit about IP and how that's going to be taken care of. It's not, at this point, nothing's been signed for IP, but because we do that in the class. We also kind of talk about the potential success and failure of the projects. And it also outlines the funding that we talked about in the project overview. Both the client and myself signed the document. It's not binding, legally binding, but it makes people think a little bit about it. And then this also facilitates the billing process, which our admin sends bills out for all of the funding in the first semester of the course. So that way all the money comes in for sponsorship and material costs in the September, October timeframe.
On our side, we're a bit more casual agreement. Mostly it's a site visit from me. We talk about the project, and then it's essentially kind of a handshake agreement until the students get into the project, where we'll talk about where they develop a scope, schedule, and deliverables list.
Just so you get an idea for the types of projects and where they come from, for the seed program, I broke it out into just a couple different areas that the projects fall into, and then the types of clients we have. So you can see the majority are between, the majority of our clients are small and medium, industry partners. But we do have a significant number that come from UVM and students and clubs. And that's not exactly where we want to be. I would prefer to push towards more of a 75% industry sponsored projects. And that's kind of my goal. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. And then this is just a overview of the types of companies that we dealt. These are logos from this year's company. So there are a couple of big names in there that you've probably heard of, like Ben & Jerry's and GD, but there's a lot of local companies that also sponsor projects as well.
So our projects we're calling service learning projects, which means that they're related to a program that we have at the university where students have credit for this service learning type course, which needs to have a component where they're dealing with a community partner, and that community partner's input is really, well, what are our needs, both on an economic and then also a social and environmental scale. and then the students giving their service. And you can see we've got a lot of communities here. We also have some physical plant work that we've done for UVM over the years. And we also have a Race to Zero from the Department of Energy competition, which we still consider community service because it's essentially a community at large, a society at large benefit. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. We're working together with the SEED program to have a joint team.
Okay, so at this point in the course, the projects have been defined. Usually this happens in the spring semester, so we're doing it now. But honestly, a lot of the work actually happens over the summer. Not exactly how I'd like it, but that's just kind of the reality. So a lot of time is spent in the summer collecting projects. So that way, on day one, we're ready to roll. So before classes even start, we'll give access for all the incoming students into the class to EduSourced using their single sign-on. And we require them to load a resume and a personal statement into EduSourced. That is then there and kind of sits with the class. On the first day of class, we will review all of the projects with the students. So I'll go through each project and we'll go through the overview. We'll talk about the needs of the client, the deliverables, the skill set they're looking for, so the students have an idea for what's out there. It's kind of an introduction to them. They don't really know what they're getting into yet, so this is a way for them to see what their options are for the year. The first week of class, so it's usually, I'd say, midweek if class starts on Monday, we have something we call a project pitch event. So we pull in all the clients and they come in for about an hour and a half long session, and they're basically pitching their projects to the students. So it's conference style. They stand behind a table, they bring in some hardware, maybe a poster, they bring in a video to really sell their project to the students, get the students excited about it, get to talk to some of the students. The students will walk around and visit as many of the clients as they like, and they basically take notes, get to know the client a little bit, see if maybe it's someone they're interested in working with. They take their notes and they go back to a computer and they submit a bid through EduSourced. And the bid is basically rank your top 7 projects, explain to me why you're a good fit for your top 3, and then give me, let me know about the skills you have that maybe you didn't have in your original personal statement, now that you know what the clients are looking for.
We've been doing something without the project pitch. I've been explaining the projects to the students in class, and then they've submitted their bids, very much like what's done in SEED. But I've learned I'm learning, and I probably will definitely change this coming year, to have the project pitch, because I think it gets the community partners to buy in more. And I think it also helps for a better match between the students and the project, either on a personality level or just a need level. So that's a big lesson learned that I'm going to take advantage of this year.
Yeah, I will say it's actually a nice event, getting the clients on campus, getting them back to, back into the school mode a little bit, getting to see the students, getting to see the size of the program that's being run. A lot of them don't really understand the scope of it until 130 students walk into a room and start asking them questions, and they really get a sense for what they're doing and how important it is. So the students at this point, the students have bid on their projects, and then it's up to me and maybe my TA or another instructor to sort them out. So I have 3 different criteria. The first is I use a priority-based project selection. And the priority just is 1, 2, 3, and it goes based on, the earlier you submit, the higher your priority. The more money you give to the program gives you a higher priority. And the higher priority projects are given preference in terms of filling them up with students first, because typically we have a couple projects that don't go forward every year. So I want to make sure clients that are committed to the program, who submit early and submit funding, get rewarded for that. The other thing we do is just look at project needs, make sure that the the cross-section of the students meets the disciplines, and we also try to match up special skills if there are any skills required. And lastly, we also look at student preference. So in the bid, the students rank their top projects, and you can see in the upper right-hand corner, rank 1, rank 2. Those are the the ranks, the projects the students prefer to work on. We try to satisfy their top 7. If I'm having questions about whether a student is a good fit for a project, I read their personal statements, I read their resumes, and that seems to be really helpful. And just a note, in the past, we've let students request teammates or request not to be with certain students, and we've eliminated that. I think that is just not in keeping with the environment that we like to promote at UVM. And then we announced teams the second week of class. The intention of this is the students are not in class for very long before they have their team. And then as soon as the teams are announced, they sit with their team the entire rest of the 2 semesters.
We're very much similar in the way we select. In the past, I've had a few more projects that I've had possibilities with teams. Our team sizes are 3 to 4 or 3 to 5 students. And I take a lot of effort in making sure, or trying to get a diversity of skills, of gender, background, cultural background, etc., so that I mimic as much as I can what these students will be doing when they leave the university.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge still. I print out all the forms and then get a big table and start making stacks. It's a little challenging, but this year all but one of my students got their top 7, and all in all, they all seem to be fairly satisfied throughout the course with what they were on. So at this point, I guess we wanted to open up for some questions, David.
Yeah, and thanks. And so just to remind everybody, there's a questions box in GoToWebinar. Punch in your question there, hit enter, and we'll be able to read that out and get a response for you. First question is it hard finding communities to work with? And that would be, I presume, for the civil projects.
I wouldn't say it's hard. It varies as far as how far away they are from our campus. And some of the students say, well, it's a 2-hour drive, so that's a bit of a challenge. But usually those projects tend to be a little more pressing for some reason. And I think this year what I'm going to do is to have a differentiator. So if a team has to be driving an hour or 2 from campus compared to walking down the hill to our local Department of Public Works, I may give them a little more credit for that, or somehow give them the benefit of that extra time that's needed. But it's generally not been too hard.
Okay, and the next one I presume is for Dustin. Has there been any pushback from clients with the LOU?
Not really. I try to make it clear that it's not legally binding, because I don't want them to feel like it's yeah, I make sure this has been reviewed by our legal counsel at UVM, so they're okay with us sending it out. But really, I think the clients actually like signing it because it kind of defines in writing what the expectations are. So not much pushback. I find it actually very beneficial to have it written down, because before we did the LOU, there was it wasn't clear what the expectations were in terms of time commitment or what you were expected to do during the year. We kind of expect the clients to make themselves available for sitting in on design reviews, for communicating with the teams once a week. And then the funding thing was also really nice to have written down. So not really much pushback.
Okay, next question is, are the speakers, well, I guess you guys, full-time faculty? Do you teach other classes beside the experiential course? And that's funny because I know that's a question you had for the audience later, but go ahead.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, we're 9-month faculty, but full-time teaching this during the year. I teach 2 other courses, one concurrently in the fall and one concurrently in the spring. So I'm teaching about 100 students a year because I have about 60 to 70 in the Capstone.
Mm-hmm. So this is Dustin. So in the past, the last 2 years, I taught Capstone, and I had a TA, and then I also taught another class, a large class as well in the fall. But I find with the size of my class, next year it's going to be 140 students, and I think the year after that they're projecting 150. I just had an agreement with our dean that next year I will not be teaching a class, and I'll only be teaching this Capstone course. I've been keeping track of my time this year in case people care to know, and managing 30 projects with a TA is a full-time job. So I hopefully that answers your questions.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions to get to. I'm going to go ahead and push a live poll for you guys in the audience just to tell us how many projects you're running in your course. And I recognize for some of you, you're probably running a sequence in the fall and the spring. This is just at one time in your course. Another question, Dustin. So it's, hi, Dustin. This is Chris from Northeastern. How did you find and decide on using EduSourced? Is there anything you wish it did that it does not do? Ooh, asking the hardball questions. That's good.
Oh, well, there's a lot of things I wish it did. I wish it graded for me, but that's not going to happen. So there are a few things. There are some features in EduSource that I don't use that I wish were better. And I'm optimistic. David at EduSource has been actually very responsive to all of my questions and requests. I'd like to say we have a pretty good relationship. So there are a few features that I would like to see better. And one is time tracking, because I use another software for time tracking. I require all my students to estimate their time and keep track of it. And the budget feature I'd like improved as well. So I'd like to be able to approve a budget and then see the students accruing expenses towards that budget. And both of those things David and I have talked about, and I know they're on their roadmap. So those are 2 things. And there are a few other things I think that would probably be better. In terms of deciding on EduSource, I wish I had a really scientific method for this, but I think I probably just got an email from David and I checked it out, and then I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then I got a free version, so I was able to work on it for a semester or a couple months just in a sandbox mode, and I thought it was a pretty good, had a lot of what I wanted. And then the first year I used it partially. I tested it out a bit, and then last year I used it full on, and I've been very happy with it.
Okay, and we'll do one more question and then go into the rest of the session, and then at the end we'll get to these spillover questions. So the next one is compared with your process before using EduSource, what would you say has been the biggest benefit of using it? And the questioner specifies for both presenters.
Okay, John, you want to go first?
So before it was a lot of paper, notebooks, and walking around with a lot of notebooks. So the biggest thing I think is twofold. One, it's time savings for me, and it comes in 2 ways. One, I post all the assignments with the milestones, and so students have a one-stop shop to find things, and then when they upload their milestones, I can, with one button, get all that information. I ask for it in PDF form, and then I put it on my iPad Pro and I grade right there. And I can then back to EduSource, put my marked up set of either graded or marked up set of comments back. So that's a real big savings. I don't know if that's both of those or not, but
for me, there's a couple. I mean, there's a lot of things I like about it. One is having everything archived. I can go back to old projects is really helpful. As the program, rolls over, you lose track of information, and so having one place for all the information is really helpful. I really like the survey feature because it allows me to survey in different ways and download the data pretty seamlessly. And I really like the ability to set the course up once and have the milestones attached directly and kind of see the students' progression through it. So there's a lot of features that I like. And I don't want to forget this one, project submissions. In the past, project submissions were done via email, and it was just a pain. So now projects come in through EduSourced. I can track their progress. The client and I can work on them directly in EduSourced. And then the students can review those projects directly in EduSourced before they bid on them. So that streamlines that process dramatically.
Okay, and I guess I lied. We should do one more question while we pull in results for this polling. So this is, do you let students bid to work together on a project?
Short answer is no. They can sit down at a computer next to each other and bid on the exact same projects. I'm not going to stop them from doing that. But when it comes to sorting them, it's really up to me to sort them. And I really don't know these students. And I may have a project that has 20 people who want to be on it, and there's only 4 spots. So you might be on with your friend, you may not. But it's really kind of independent of that. I think I do see that sometimes, though.
Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry, John.
Well, it just I know them a little bit more now because I have some of them as juniors, so I can see which ones may have worked together. And I try and avoid, if I can, an obvious team up because I really want to separate the groups to be more like their work experience. But and the short answer, I think, for both of us is they don't submit as teams. They submit individually, and then it's their luck of the draw as far as how they end up on a team.
Okay, so this last poll we did before we move on, do you teach additional courses alongside your capstone? I know it was a question you guys wanted to ask the audience. Do you have any thoughts or reaction to this result?
Let's see if I can see the results.
So if it's not up on your screen, it's 77% are saying yes, 8% are saying no, so they're only teaching capstone, and then 15% are not currently teaching capstone at all.
Okay, that's interesting. I think the follow-on question I would be interested in is for those who, you know, are not only teaching capstone, what are, like, how many projects and are they co-teaching as well? Because in the past, when I started at UVM, I was co-teaching this class, and then the co-instructor got pulled off and put on something else, and it landed in my lap as my course. And so, anyway, I'm mostly interested in you know, how many students and are there additional instructors that are teaching with you? But that's interesting.
Okay, and that's it for the live polling. So if you gentlemen want to jump back into your content, and then we'll circle back and do some final questions at the end.
Sure, great. So so now I'd like to just talk a bit about managing these projects at scale. So for my class, I've got 30 projects this last year, and I expect 34, 35 this year. John's got, what, 17?
17 projects this year.
Yep.
It'll probably be a little smaller next year because of a smaller class, but probably no less than 12.
Yep. So so to start off, you basically create assignments or milestones in EduSourced, and I've used every milestone. You can see the top right corner. You can see that those are some example milestones. For example, we have a team introduction video, and you can see that there is a attachment to that. It's called deliverable video, and if the students open that up, it tells them exactly what they need to submit for that project. And then when they there's a due date on that as well, so they know what they're supposed to do and when it's due. When they submit a project, when they submit their deliverable, it shows up in the right-hand side there. On the bottom right, you can see the status of these deliverables, and the checks mean different things. So a green check means the deliverable was submitted, a gray check means it wasn't submitted, and a white check means it's partially completed. And that happens when you have an individual assignment for an entire group. So that means each student has to submit something. So the white check on the far right-hand side means that a couple of the students have submitted their certificates of prior art tutorials, and some of them haven't. So you kind of get a big picture view of the status of deliverables for across the board. The other thing is at the top row, you can see a download button there. And if I hit the download button, it downloads all of the deliverables for all of the teams, and it zips it up in a file that I can download to my network drive or my computer. And now I have all the assignments in one place. So it actually makes that much easier. When we were using Blackboard in the past, it was a real pain. And then when I'm done grading an assignment, I actually will load up the comments directly into that milestone, and then the students can see the feedback from the instructor. One thing we don't do is we don't load grades into EduSourced because it's not, clients can't get access to it, and for FERPA reasons we can't do that. But all the comments go in there and the grades go into Blackboard. One of the nice things is that the milestones, when you set them up, they're continuous each year, and you can adjust them and tweak them if you want to, but you aren't redoing the course each year. All the information is still there.
This is John. I'm just chime in and say, lesson I learned was to have milestones very frequent. What I do is have something due essentially every 2 weeks, and it's usually a project milestone, but I have some course deliverables as well. So I learned the hard way that leaving things to twice a semester didn't work. So I really like this milestone tab because students can also see what's coming up for the whole year.
Mm-hmm. And I break my course into 3 different phases: a preliminary phase, which you can see there, critical, and then a final design phase. And each phase has different milestones. And the milestones are pretty frequent, and they're all graded in some way. Some of them are very low percent, but they're all graded. I also use EduSourced as a way to store files. So for example, I have a lot of templates in my class. So templates for homework assignments, templates for like bills of materials, failure mode analysis, things like that. I also put up examples. I also will load in my lecture notes in there, any additional reading or important links and syllabus, things like that. So it's a kind of a one repository for all the files that students may want over the course, but aren't necessarily assignments. So it's kind of a nice place to put it. And this stuff remains there year after year. And Microsoft Office is integrated into EduSourced, so you can actually edit the file directly in EduSourced if you need to update it. So it's actually kind of a nice feature to be able to do the editing right online. The other thing I do is I do surveys, and I do a couple different kinds. The first one I'd like to talk about is the peer survey. So I do a 360 peer evaluation in the middle of the semester. So it's the students evaluate themselves and they evaluate their teammates. And you can see on the top right, this is a good example of a student who thought a lot more of themselves than their teammates did. In the light green, they thought they were doing 4s and 5s, and their peers thought they were doing more like 2s and 3s. So in the middle of the semester, the survey goes out. The students get the feedback. They see what their teammates think of them. I review the performance or the low performers and send an email basically to ask them to correct correct the course they're on. Talk to me, talk to the TA, talk to your teammates, really try to get back on track. This is actually a really useful tool. I've had students come in and talk to me and say, I had no idea my teammates didn't think I was performing. I said, well, let's have a conversation about this. And it's really, I've seen teammates go from underperformers to the top performers on their teams after they realize their teammates think they aren't doing well. I also export all the data from this at the end of the, so they do it in the end of the semester as well. I export all the data and I have a a little formula that I've cooked up, where basically I average the team score, I average the individual scores, and you can see here, for example, the team score for this team was a 4.1, and then I average the individuals, and the person up top, his average was 2.4, and I take the ratio of those two. So his ratio is 0.595. So that means he's significantly underperforming on the team, and I kind of give myself the leeway to adjust his grade up, in this case, up to like 30% lower than the team's grade. So it can be pretty harsh, but the students are aware of this. I tell them on day one that it's important to participate, and your teammates, really can affect your grade. So, you really need to have good communications, and they need to have a good perception of you. I take some leeway in how I adjust the grades. So in this case, this particular student did not do so well in the class. So it is, but it is helpful. The other surveys I do client evaluation. So students, how was your client? A team evaluation, client, how was your team? And then this year I did a course evaluation. So students, how was the course? All this feedback can be easily downloaded and reviewed to try to get a sense for, should I use the same client again next year? Were they a problem? Also, I can use the client, the team evaluation from the client to help actually grade the team. So part of the students' grades are the client evaluation. And then the course evaluation is really for me. How can I improve my course to make it better? So I'm excited. I haven't looked at the results yet, but I'm excited to see what the students say this year. And I think I probably have about half the students filled that one out. Just for grading purposes, we submit all the grades on Blackboard, and every assignment I have has a rubric. So in Blackboard, I just put the grade in and then copy and paste the rubric into Blackboard, and it's fine. For class communication, to communicate with the entire class, I use Blackboard. They have an announcements feature that works well. If EduSourced had that, I would use that. There's some issue right now with it with our program. So, but it's a feature I would expect to be coming soon. But I don't mind doing it. It works out okay. One of the features I really do like about EduSourced is team communication. In the past, trying to figure out whose team was, the students' emails on the teams was a pain. So when you have your project set up, you assign your students, and you can go into their project and you can email just the students themselves, the entire team, or just the mentors, and it allows you to quickly send notes, and it just pops up a new email in Outlook for me, and blind CCs everyone, and I just write the note up and send it out, and it's actually pretty convenient. I really like that feature.
Yeah, I found that to be a big time saver, and I communicate back to teams after I've done reviews with that. So I'll attach something, and so that's not an EduSourced, it's just in their email, but they all get it. And I found that to be a big time saver, because otherwise, just as Dustin said, you're trying to track down emails, and this way it's all in one spot, and that's pretty quick.
Yep. You can also email all the clients of active projects as well from EduSourced, which has been helpful because I try to send monthly updates to clients, and this is a good feature. It's a very similar feature to do that. So one of the topics we teach in our class is about project management. A little bit. John does actually quite a bit more than I do, but I've stumbled upon an online tool called Team Gantt. That is I was granted an educational license to do this, and it is basically a Gantt chart tool, and it allows me to, allows the students to take the course milestones and put them into a Gantt chart style, create their own internal milestones related specifically to their course. It allows them to track their time, so there's a time tracking feature. And one of the things I really like about this program is it allows the student to estimate the number of hours for a task. And then when they keep track of their time, you can see the comparison for estimate versus actual. And in the deliverables, I require that they give me a comparison of estimate versus actual for all the major tasks, not so much to determine whether they were accurate or not, but mostly just as a way for them to reflect on maybe why they were incorrect and how they might be able to predict better in the future. From the faculty perspective, in Team Gantt, I can see all of the schedules for all the projects. So if I want to know what a team is doing, I can drop into their project and I can see what they're doing. I can monitor progress if I want to, or if I have the time. I can also run time reports and see who's been submitting time as well in the class. So it's a tool that I've been using for 2 years and I find is pretty useful. But there are a few things I can improve on it. But it's with an educational license, it's free, it's web-based, and the students, I think it's pretty intuitive. John, I think you use a different program for project management.
Yeah, I've had students use Team Gantt, or had that opportunity this year. In the past, I've used Microsoft Project. I'll admit that my students aren't really keen on using project management tools this way. They don't see the value of it at the beginning, and I think at the end they do, but it's a little late.
Yeah, it's something that I think I definitely need to work on. But I find the time tracking actually to be useful, especially if I have a student with a poor peer review, and then you look at their time and you see that they're at 50% time of their peers. It kind of reinforces the that poor peer review that they probably weren't putting the time in. So it's a nice backup. I also have to schedule a lot of meetings with students. So just to get a sense for the number of meetings that we have with teams. So we do 8 team meetings per year per group, 3 design reviews. We do a hazard assessment review. We do 2 project demonstrations throughout the year. So with 30 teams, that's 420 meetings with student teams, which is kind of crazy. So doing that via Outlook is a nightmare. So I use a Doodle poll to set up my time slots. I send the poll out. The students will sign up their team for the time that works for them, and then I show up and they show up and we're all set. So it's a convenient tool for setting up meetings that doesn't involve 420 Outlook invites, which would be crazy. If students do need to meet with me independently, I require that they send me a meeting Outlook Outlook invite, so it's on my calendar and I show up for it. It's something students aren't used to, but once they figure it out, they get pretty good at it, and it's actually a fairly common tool in industry. So I think it's a good habit to get into. And this was one additional. We want to talk just briefly about cross-department communications. So as we've been talking. I teach the senior design class for electrical, mechanical, and biomedical, and John teaches for Capstone, civil and environmental. So just a couple of the ways that we work together is often when we get surveys ready, we'll kind of piggyback on each other's ideas and use the same survey when necessary. So that's been helpful. I can get access to John's program via EduSourced. There's just a drop-down menu. I can go from seed to Capstone and jump in his program if I want to see what he's doing, which is nice. Because we sit next to each other, our offices are adjacent, we often see each other, and we actually talk quite a bit about successful and failed milestones, what worked well, what didn't work well. So it's really a nice benefit to being co-located and to be teaching the same course. We really do get a lot of good ideas from each other and learn from each other, which has been nice. We also, this coming year, have both decided to adopt a new course structure, and this was something we talked about a bit. And we used to teach 3 50-minute classes, and this year we're going to 2 2-hour labs and 1 2-hour lecture. And the labs, each lab would have about half the teams in them. So from my perspective, it'll be really good to be able to do some hands-on learning with the students with half the class in our lab. It also frees up a 2-hour block of time where students can actually work together as a team. Because right now, Most students are so overscheduled, they can't find 2 hours together to work. So having additional time set aside for teamwork, I think will be very beneficial in the future. And then this is just an image of a combined project that we did this last year. So this is the Race to Zero competition. The mechanical and electrical did the MEP for it, mechanical, electrical, plumbing for this building. And the civil environmental did the structural and environmental part of the project. Each of the teams followed the course milestones for our own independent courses, but then they worked together on the model to, to basically integrate it together. And this was paired with a community partner as well. And then the last thing is at the end of the year, we do a design night. And this is something John and I do together. So we have about 40 teams that we get tables and poster boards. And all the students, all my students have hardware. So they show up with their hardware for demonstrations. John's students have posters. My students show up with posters as well. And it's a kind of a party where we invite the general public, the faculty, people at the university to walk around and really just kind of appreciate all the work the students put into their projects. And it's a really good kind of culmination of the year. Parents come, family come, friends. So it's a nice kind of closure on the year. And it's a good way for the students to feel good about what they did. The other thing it does is it puts a lot of pressure on them to have their project working for design night. So I have students who projects aren't working, they've already been graded on their demonstration, yet they continue to work on it because they want to be at design night with a working product. So to me, that shows a lot of maturity and commitment to the project and their client that I like to see.
Now, I'll just say, if you can't tell now, Dustin's been a little bit ahead, quite a bit ahead of me on EduSourced. He's pretty much asked a lot of the questions before I got into it, and so I'm following him a little bit, although our models are a little different also. And I'll echo that design night benefit. It really is, it's a fun night for the students. They all leave, they're all dressed up for it. They just are really jazzed, and I think they're all happy after a year's worth of hard work. So if you have a chance to do that, definitely we found that it pays off very well.
It does. And the other thing it does is if you're smart about it, you can actually invite communities, local businesses, people on the board of advisors to design night, and that actually is a way to get interest in the program as well. So now you've got people who maybe don't know about it, they come and they see what you've done, and now they think, oh, maybe I could use this in my company. So it's a real good, it's a good event, and the students really love it. It's the favorite night of the year for me for working there at UVM. And this is really the last slide. I have one more, but it's more about things that maybe I could do better in the future. But maybe we open up for questions.
Okay, and we've got some questions to get to. We've also got a couple live polls to do. So this one is up now. If you could respond to it, how long are your projects that you're directly involved with? And we'll jump into some of these questions. And if you have more questions too, feel free to type them in. Even if we don't get to everything today, we can address them after the session in a blog post. The next question is, how do you ensure a reasonable quality of the final product of the project, assuming that not all students are on top of things and really produce? Has anyone failed the course yet? And I guess I'll just open that to both of you since you have separate courses.
So in 3 years, I failed one student. He basically disappeared and just kind of never came back. I have given out a few Ds. So my philosophy is that the success of the project is a combination of the performance, the functionality of their product, but also the adherence to the design process. So your product can actually not work at all, and you can still pass the course. Because I don't want to discourage creativity and innovation at the expense of not passing the class. I don't guarantee success, and I tell my clients that. No guarantee in success. success is improved as when you get students digging into the problem sooner and building stuff sooner. So last year I pulled in my first demonstration to the end of the first semester. So the students have to demonstrate some type of functionality before they leave in the fall. And that actually has helped quite a bit. But yes, sometimes the projects don't work that well. I have never had any that don't work in some capacity. But there have been some that are definitely less stellar than others.
Yeah, for my case, for these building infrastructure community projects, I've had one where the students did not respond to final review comments, and I didn't know that, and I got burned by the client. My fault. I had one student, as Dustin had, that just fell off coming to class and failed himself. But generally, at the end, they're always okay or better. You know, they provided some value to the client, new ideas, different thinking, providing information that the client didn't have. So they turn out okay, and some are really excellent because the students just get so excited about it because it's either a socially interesting project or they're just a good team.
Yeah, I can't guarantee success, but the more involved the client is, the better, because part of what I try to teach is that they're doing this not just for a grade, but they're doing it for the client. And so they feel beholden to someone besides just me. And so they're more motivated.
Okay, so we have a quick comment. It looks like Chris from Northeastern is mentioning we do a letter of commitment at Northeastern, very valuable and creates clarity. So I think that's a good insight from everyone. We heard from Dustin that you do a letter of understanding and that's been helpful. So that seems to be the consensus. The next question is, how much say do the sponsors, especially if they're faculty, have in selecting the student team members?
My clients and faculty typically have no say in it. The exceptions are if a client has a student who is an intern at their company and they want that intern on their project, I will grant that. If a faculty has a student who's working in their lab for research or has done research with them in the past and the student requests to be on that project, then I typically will honor that request.
In my case, it has never come up that there's been a need from the client. At least the client has not said, I need this person on my team.
What is interesting is I have had some requests for gender specific students, which typically it's been, I'd like to have more women on my team. And I've tried to honor that as well when that has come up.
Okay, the next question. Have you found students being confused among a course management tool like Blackboard, Capstone management tool like EduSourced, and something additional? In your case, you're using a project management tool like TeamGAN.
Yeah, it's a number of platforms to deal with. So it can be a little confusing. I'm trying to minimize the number, but unfortunately, there's not one tool that does everything. If EduSourced did everything I wanted, I would use it, I think. But it doesn't have the project management, and that's something I really want students to get exposed to. I would love to ditch Blackboard, but I just can't put grades on EduSource. And I think they're okay with that. I think it's not the number of platforms, but making sure the platforms are intuitive and easy to use. Students are pretty savvy these days with all these different software they've been using. So I think it's something they get a handle on, but I think it's, how intuitive is it is what's going to make it easier.
Yeah, in my case, I don't think it's the variety of platforms, it's the quantity of information. And I think Blackboard in particular, I've had students say that there's just too much information there. So that may be something that I need to work on, but I do find that they need more information than they might realize, and it's just, where do you find it?
Yeah, and I'll say for my part, representing EduSourced, we don't expect to ever be able to replace, a full project management tool like a Microsoft project. It's just such a deep dive and such a rabbit hole. Although recognizing it's frustrating when there are a lot of different tools, I think some of the lighter PM elements, like simply being able to chart time and progress against said time, and thinking about budget. We already have a time tracking and a budget tracking feature, but they're not as fully realized as that. So our vision is to make those things and maybe a couple other parts a little bit more robust, and hopefully for some percentage of schools reduce the need for PM. Although I recognize that for some schools there will always be a need for PM. I don't think that's going to change. I think we have time for one more question. On the educational side, we know that elements like documentation, project management, time tracking, team assessment, and progress updates are necessary. Students tend to view them as getting in the way of the project work. The questioner has been trying to reframe that for them. Any ways to help us package that to have higher acceptance or less resistance? I think that's really related to what we've been talking about.
Yeah. So one thing that I've been doing at the end of my course is just something called lessons learned. And, at the final design review, I request that they kind of go over what did they learn over the course. And a lot of them will highlight things that we did at the beginning of the course that they felt were busy work as actually being valuable. And so what I'm going to be doing in the future is actually incorporating that lessons learned into each phase of the project. So after the preliminary phase, I'll be asking them to reflect on, what went well, what didn't go right, and kind of, anything they learned from that part of the project and how they can apply it to the future part. So that might help. The other thing is, I don't know, that's a really hard question. I've tried to reduce the amount of documentation at the beginning of the year, but it's really hard to. And I've added some additional assignments that the students did not like, but I think like, for example, I introduced an intro video to build trust and teamwork. And I had some students say that was one of the most important assignments they did because it got them to know each other. So it's a really hard it's a really hard question.
I guess if we knew that, we'd be great at it. I have the same as I think the questioner's comment, concerns, students saying there's busy work and do I really need to do this? One thing I'm trying to do is to say, in past years, this is what students have told me was hard at the end. So I'm just telling you at the beginning what they learned. If you want to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and my intent is to actually take the lessons learned from previous years and make them available for new students so they can start combing through them. So they can kind of learn from previous students, like, oh, this was important, because they won't necessarily listen to me. So yeah, if anyone has that answer, please tell me.
Well, thank you guys so much for the presentation, and thanks to everyone listening for the questions, some really great questions. We didn't get to everything, so we'll post a follow-up on our blog with some written responses to what you've asked. And we'll also be posting the recording, so you can keep an eye out for that if you want to rewatch it or if you wanted to share with anyone who wasn't able to attend. So thank you guys all. Appreciate it, and we'll see you soon. We'll have a new, I've just got a comment from Todd, and I can never say no to Todd from UT Dallas. So wants me to put in a plug for the 2020 Capstone Design Conference. Yeah, of course. So there is a Capstone Design Conference coming up. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It runs biannually, and this will be happening in June 2020 at UT Dallas. So I guess that's confirmed. Before I'd heard that was maybe up in the air. So that's great. I can't wait to go. And I should also mention, and Todd's involved with this too, as are some of the other folks on this call, we are working with a small number of schools next month, and then later on we're going to open it up to everybody. So we want to hurry up and get this thing finalized and open it up to you all. But it's really going to be a group of schools, both engineering and business schools, because we as a company, we work with business schools too, and bring everyone together for probably what will end up being quarterly workshops where schools are presenting on specific topics, and these are going to be interactive and designed to give you some takeaways. And then either every year or every 2 years, we're still finalizing the details, but an in-person summit to share best practices and insights, have presentations. So kind of the standard conference format you're probably used to, but what I think will be different here is it'll be inclusive of business schools and engineering schools, and it'll be really focused on client-based experiential learning. So thank you all for attending, and we'll see you on our next client webinar. Bye-bye.